I run a private campground. Since my last couple posts have been dedicated to the dumb things my campers and the locals do, I suppose it's only fair if I contribute some of my own stupidity. Though I feel calling it stupidity is a bit of a stretch, recklessness. Personally, I think of it as doing my job, but maybe some of you will feel otherwise. If you're new here, you should start at the beginning, and if you're totally lost, this might help. I've been trying to figure out what to do for the thing in the dark. Maybe I'm being woefully naive, but I can't help but wonder if I restored it, if it had stopped swallowing up people who look at it. Perhaps it's possible for the thing in the dark to live peacefully alongside the campers. Wouldn't that be nice? Make the campground safer by helping one of these inhuman things instead of killing it. What happened with the lady with the extra eyes still weighs heavy on me. I went to my brother's house to talk with him about the problem. He spent more time going over Mash's journal and trying to piece it together with the family notes. I've been relying on him for the more intellectual business of the campground. It's a big relief. I felt quite overwhelmed lately trying to figure out how to make up for the financial losses of last year, while also prepping for the camping season. I'm not sure what I'd do if I had to do research on top of that. Give up sleeping, I guess. My frequent visits have had the happy side effect of improving my relationship with his wife. She still doesn't want her daughter to be involved in the campground, and I've sworn that when she's older, I won't talk about it, and if the subject comes up, I'll make it sound like a bunch of boring paperwork and picking up discarded beer bottles. That'll be easy. It really is a lot of boring paperwork and picking up discarded beer bottles. You all just get to hear about the interesting stuff. I think her daughter is doomed already, but she doesn't need to know that. The campground will call to her like it called to me. She loves the land because it will feel more like home to her than anywhere else. Her time with the fairies may help her interact with human society, but it'll never erase her connection to the unnatural. If anything, it'll probably make it stronger problems for future Kate, I guess. Tyler's wife will have to learn that she can't control her daughter just as we can't control the forest. It has a mind of its own. In the meantime, the changeling is working out. Great. Tyler and his wife have no idea. The changeling is quite good at what she's here to do. I am likely the only person in town that has any idea that the child is not human, and that's where the problem lies. The changeling knows I know, and she seems to take glee in doing things to annoy me, knowing that I can't call her out on her behavior. I have been spit up on so many times. This changeling is going to be a nightmare for the next 5 years. My brother, unfortunately, didn't have a lot of information on the thing in the dark. Mash's had some encounters with it, but he didn't make the bargain to help it become whole until near the end of his journal. The coherency deteriorates steadily throughout, and by the end, it's reduced to fragments and hastily scribbled notes that only Mash's could understand. Perhaps the journal started with the intention of being readable by successive generations, but it certainly didn't end that way. Tyler did notice that as the coherency degraded, Mash's confidence increased. His idle questions decreased and vanished entirely in the last third. No more did he spend pages musing on the nature of heaven and earth and hell, and how all that related to old land. But now his sentences were terse and direct. I must go here. I must do this. I've had brief insights like this before. I can feel some changes to the land, such as the approach of a bad year. I just never tried to use this to my advantage. It is an ephemeral knowledge, coming when I need it and no more. Tyler's theory is that I can hone this sense. He doesn't have it, but he has also spent many years away from the campground and was never keen on it like I was while growing up. Between that and Mash's journal, He thinks that the key is exposure. The more someone is around the unnatural world, the more in tune with it someone grows. Our evidence is pretty flimsy, I admit, to personal anecdotes and a journal that's over 100 years old. I'm used to working off guesses and hunches, though I planned to start simple. There was no urgency to this. After all, the thing in the dark has been waiting a long time to be made whole already. A little longer won't do any harm. I hope there's been enough excitement over the past few months that I wanted a bit of a break as well. I wasn't feeling up to a tea party with bow or keg stands with the dancers or storming the hall of the gummy bears. I'd go camping nice and simple. A night out in the woods or by the edge of the forest, rather. I didn't particularly feel like camping in the deep woods. That'd be asking for trouble. I don't even put campers in the deep woods until the camp is at capacity, and the sheer amount of humans blundering around tends to send most inhuman things back to their lairs. I drove my truck out to a nice spot, set up a tent, and settled in for a quiet evening enjoying the great outdoors. I made a campfire, heated up water for hot chocolate, and was toasting marshmallows when Bo arrived. He sat down without invitation on the ground opposite me. I'd only brought one camp chair, and I felt a little bad about that, but he didn't seem to mind. I haven't seen you around for a bit, I said. I show up when you need me. Do I need you right now? Is there something I should know? No, you're already aware. The risks. Camping is not without its dangers. I was outside the protection of my house, I sighed. After a moment, I offered him a marshmallow, but had just finished toasting up Nestle. It was the least I could do, since I didn't have any hot chocolate to give him. He dropped it in his skull cup. I'm so sorry that whatever camper has to drink from it next my bag. I'm not sure what's in there, but it cannot possibly taste good paired with a marshmallow. Well, if I'm in no more danger than normal, I said, I'm still curious as to why you're here. Why I'm here? He asked sharply. You're the one taking up residence in the forest for the night that got my attention. I seized on it with a sudden hope and an even greater fear. Was this some sort of etiquette violation? Was this the reason these creatures preyed on my campers? Because they entered the forest? Should I have asked permission first? I asked nervously. Of me? Of course not. But should I have asked permission? He considered for a moment. I offered him another marshmallow as a bribe, and he added this to his cup as well. His piercings glinted with light from the fire as he stared into the cup's surface, watching the marshmallows drift in the liquid. I don't think it would change anything, he finally said. Permission is not necessary. It is enough to know you're an interloper here. So first off, I'm kind of glad that I don't have to add rule number 1. Ask the forest for permission before you set up your tents to my list, because the pamphlets are already printed for the year, and that's not a small expense. But secondly, yikes. Nervously, I tried to change the topic, because after Bo's comments, I could feel the weight of the forest at my back, like it was pressing down on me. The shadows picking at the edges of the campfire, the branches stretching out fingers towards the back of my neck. Is keeping an eye on me the only reason you're here? I asked. You're here to protect your ticket to Ascension? I'd hoped to get him talking about that long night in my house, listening to the battle raging outside, about how he couldn't ascend yet and what it would take to make that happen. But he gave me such a look of disgust that I was momentarily taken aback. There was scorn in his narrowed eyes. He quickly looked away, abruptly standing to leave, leaving me to wonder what the hell that was all about. Did he not like that I called it out so blatantly? These inhuman things tend to not just say things out loud. After all, or maybe all the shipping has finally altered his nature and made him care about me and he's being angsty over having to someday kill me, it's okay to admit you like me. I called after him. We should hang out more. So I guess our relationship has been upgraded to trolling. It's an improvement. Beau's words had left me unsettled, though. Interloper, I've always known it in my heart. But there's a familiarity with this land that makes me feel like I belong here, and that it belongs to me. I didn't linger for much longer. As soon as the fire began to die, I retreated to my tent and huddled in my sleeping bag, pulling a pile of blankets over me for good measure. It's still cold at night. I'm not sure what time it was when I woke. There was a snap from somewhere close by, and I was instantly awakened. I lay there, heart pounding, listening intently. It hadn't sounded like a branch breaking. Did a tent pole snap? The tent was still upright, but I ran my gaze along its seams, searching for a bowing of the fabric. Was it something else? Uneasily, I placed my hand on the hilt of the knife that I'd put under my pillow before going to sleep. Nothing. Slowly, I sat up. Perhaps it was a tree branch after all, or perhaps Beau was pranking me as retaliation for my last comment. Maybe he'd taken up trolling as well. My breath came out in a cloud. It was cold, but I didn't think it should be this cold. I swore and hastily extricated myself out of the sleeping bag. The frost, so much for my bonding experience with the forest. The frost was coming and I needed to relocate. I grabbed the zipper of the tent and found it wouldn't budge. Now that I was out from under my pile of blankets, my teeth were chattering with the cold. It had come up on me fast. Had it always been this quick to form? I pulled the knife from its sheath. Unfortunately, I'd taken my own advice, and my tent was not cheap. There was a brief moment of mourning for it, and then I slashed an opening into the tent fabric. Rip tent. May you feast with your brethren four-wheelers and campground. Valhalla. My knife struck something that held firm as I cut through the tent. I made another slash, forming a triangle, and then peeled the fabric down. On the other side was a wall of ice. It encased the tent. I slammed the hilt of the knife on it, but it only chipped. It had to be thick. My heart hammered in my chest. How the hell had it formed so quickly? I'd never heard of something like this happening before. I tried to stay calm. Surely this wasn't airtight. Surely I wouldn't run out of oxygen in here, right? Or maybe I wouldn't find out, because I'd just freeze to death first. Frantically, I grabbed my cell phone. It wouldn't hurt to get some backup. I unlocked the phone and found myself staring at an icon notifying me that I had 0 bars. Apparently, you can't get cell service when trapped inside an unnatural prison of ice. Who knew? I let the phone slip out of numb fingers. I was on my own. There was no one who would come for me. There was no one left that I could have asked to stand by just in case. Turtle left. Brian left. My aunt and uncle were dead. The old sheriff had given me enough already, and my brother had started a family and had the good sense to stay away from here. I've been alone for a long time. I can't say it doesn't hurt sometimes when you realize all your friendships are superficial and all it takes to fall apart is for the other person to find something more interesting. I've learned to live with that, come to expect it. Even it's not so bad being the only person you can rely on. It forces you to fight for yourself. I took the knife in both hands. I slammed the hilt as hard as I could against the ice. I don't think I'm a particularly clever person. I know a lot of stories. I've seen a lot of shit, but I didn't have any great ideas. No plan other than to fight my way out. So I smashed the knife, hilt against the ice, again and again, resolutely chipping away at it. My skin was numb wherever it was exposed to the freezing cold, but I couldn't let myself stop. There was no way out other than through. I put all my muscle behind it, all the strength I had from years of fighting both monsters and the land itself. And then the knife broke. The hilt, made from my second cousin's fibula, cracked in two lengthwise. Bits of bone splintered off, and as it broke, there was another sharp crack, like a gunshot, and the ice exploded where the last impact of the knife had landed. It punched through, leaving a hole the size of my fist. Desperately, I shoved my hand through, feeling for the exterior of the ice wall, trying to discern how thick it was. There was a tingling sensation in my other hand, and I glanced down. Blood ran down it, dropping onto the frosted tent floor. My fingers were so numb they hadn't even felt when the blade of the knife sliced them open as I clutched at the broken hilt from outside the tent. Someone grabbed my wrist. I tried to jerk my hand free, but the grip was unrelenting. On the other side of the ice wall, I could only see a hazy outline of a person. "There you are," a man said. "You're quite persistent. Can you get me out of here?" I asked, my voice shaking from how hard I was trembling. The cold had settled into my bones. I might be able to. "Wait a moment for me." He let go. I snatched my hand back and tucked it close to me, shivering as I crouched inside the tent and waited. I had no idea who this person was, but I wasn't going to question it if they were going to help me. Another snap. The sound echoed in the small chamber loud enough to make me flinch. Another, and then a section of the ice fell away, shattering as it hit the frozen ground beyond. I didn't waste any time. I ducked through, stumbling out and sucking in lungfuls of frosty air. It burned in my throat. All around me the grass was covered in a thick layer of ice. I took small steps, trying not to slip. I had to get out of here. I had to be near the epicenter of the frost, and it was moving far faster and with far more intensity than I was familiar with. I glanced about for my rescuer as I hurried away from the tent. I didn't see them, though, not until a hand seized the back of my head by my hair. On instinct, I stabbed backwards with the knife, but my fingers were still numb from the cold, and I lacked a proper hilt with which to hold it. The blade slipped out of my grasp and fell to the ground. "There's something you should see before you run back to your home," the man said firmly. "Who are you?" I asked desperately. He wasn't human. I could tell that much by how strong his grip was. I struggled briefly and hastily stopped when his grip tightened, my hair pulling painfully against my scalp. I couldn't turn my head in any direction except that which he wanted. He had me look back towards my tent. In front of it, where the campfire had been, was a pit, not very large, perhaps only 5 feet in diameter. The sides were sheer, as if someone had taken a cookie cutter to the earth. My captor and rescuer shoved me forwards, directing me towards it. Another shove, and I dropped to my knees beside it. The frozen blades of grass stabbed through the thin fabric of my pajamas. "You see them?" The man hissed. He shoved my head closer to the yawning pit. The hole stretched down into the darkness of the earth until light could reach no further. What little soul I could see shone with the silver lacing of frost. It was hard to see much of the sides, for the pit was choked with bodies. They clung to the sides, half engulfed by the soil. Heads and torsos and limbs protruded from the sides, writhing and struggling to pull themselves up out of the earth. Their flesh was pallid and shone with ice. Dead eyes stared up at me, frozen solid and whitened, lips parted to reveal tongues black with frostbite. "Look, see how many there are?" I clawed at the hand gripping the back of my head. His flesh was warm, unusual for inhuman things, but his skin refused to yield as I dug my nails into it. trying to draw blood or elicit any sort of reaction that would cause him to release me. I don't know what you want from me, I cried desperately. You need to make this right, he said grimly. The frost will only continue to grow until you do, he hauled, wrenching me to my feet. My eyes watered at the pain at the back of my head. Then he turned me around and shoved me forwards, propelling me away from the pit. Go, he commanded. Don't forget what you've seen, as if I could. But I didn't question his benevolence in releasing me. I just ran. I had to get away from here, back to warmth, back to safety. And as I hurried away from the frost, I stopped only to grab my knife, and I took a single glance back. The man was gone. Of course, I'd never gotten a look at him. All I have to show for my camping trip is a broken knife and a lot more questions. I'm a campground manager. I have a list of all the creatures on my land and how dangerous I think they are and how urgently I need to deal with them. The thing in the dark was at the top of my list, not because I think it outranks things like the harvesters, but because I think it was the one I stood the best odds of being able to do something about. Unfortunately, I think I need to put the frost at the top of that list. The thing in the dark is important, yes, but the frost is now urgent. I need to make this right, he said, and I need to do that before the big events, where I put campers down in the deep woods where the snow has yet to melt. I was delirious from blood loss when I reached the cemetery. My death was gone and it was just me stumbling through the gate and down the rows of gravestones. I couldn't remember when she left me. My memory was growing hazy. Blood soaked my shirt and my khakis and was running down my leg, leaving a thin trail behind me in the dirt. I kept pressure on the wound with one hand, but I had no idea if it was helping and just how much blood I'd lost. I didn't even know how deep the wound was. It hurt. It took my breath away with every movement. My death had taken me through the woods faster than I'd thought possible. We outran the beast, hand in hand with it crashing through the woods behind me. It snapped branches and toppled trees as it pursued us, howling its rage. Its victory was close at hand. It could taste its triumph. It smelled my blood in the air. I'd at least had the presence of mind to keep tight hold of the mason jar as we ran. I still had the key, and I'd managed to sheath my knife back at my waist before fleeing. The logical, reasonable part of my mind whispered that I was safe here. The cemetery was a sacred place, after all, drenched with the blood of all my family members that died. All those sacrifices, resting here in this one place, the air was thick with it. I could sit down and catch my breath, call 911 on my cell phone, and wait the beast out, survive, heal, and then figure out a plan, a reasonable, rational plan, one that involved weapons, pen, strategy, and perhaps the old sheriff on a hill with a high-powered rifle, the old sheriff. My eyes flooded with tears as I fell to my knees before a particular headstone. He wanted to help me. If I'd known how, I would have let him. Neither of us would get that chance now. I leaned my forehead against my parents' gravestone. The stone was blessedly cool against my feverish skin. The beast was still coming. I could feel its approach. I lacked the confidence that the graveyard's boundaries would hold it back, for it was a creature born of my family's anger, and it belonged here as much as I did. The rules were changing. The boundaries were weakening. There was nowhere I was safe anymore. I opened the mason jar with trembling hands. It took a few attempts as my hands kept slipping, but with my own blood. I shook the key out of the cotton was swaddled in, and it rested on my palm, such a tiny, delicate thing. One chance. I had only one chance to get this right. My parents' grave is decorated with engraved flowers. In the middle, between their names, is a rose. There is no particular significance of the decoration. It merely looks nice, but as I stared down on it, I thought I saw something else. An indentation at the exact center dot, like a keyhole. A keyhole barely millimeter wide. I held the key between thumb and forefinger. My dominant hand was covered with sticky, and the key affixed itself to that. My entire body was shaking. I didn't know how much longer I could keep going like this. But what choice did I have? I had to fight through, just as I'd fought through everything else. Where was the beast? Why hadn't it caught up to me yet? I pushed the key into the tiny indentation. There was a subtle snap as the key broke into, and the pieces fell somewhere into the dirt. I didn't see where they landed. For a moment I knelt there in utter despair, thinking that it would be best to just lay down and hope I fainted from blood lost before the beast arrived. I was wrong. My intuition had failed me, and now I'd broken the basement key, and there wouldn't be another. The ground underneath me shifted. It felt soft. I quickly scrambled away from it, and no sooner had I moved to the side than it fell away, crumbling down into the darkness of the earth. Before me was a staircase. The steps were made of wood, like the old basement stairs I'd seen in other houses in the area. I couldn't see what lay at the bottom. At the edge of the graveyard came the crash of a fence shattering. I glanced up, startled, and saw the beast. Its pole rested on the boundary of the cemetery, the fence crushed beneath its bulk. It stared at me and then opened its mouth, revealing its teeth and the glow that emanated from its throat. It seemed brighter now, like a sun burning inside its chest. It took another step over the boundary and into the cemetery. There was nowhere else to go. I stumbled to my feet and threw myself into the basement. My feet slipped on the stairs, and I clutched at the smooth earthen wall for balance. Behind me, a hot wind buffeted my back, and the roar of the beast filled my ears. I ran, tumbling down the stairs, and I felt something close behind me, and I lost my balance and fell. There was an impact on my shoulder. Pain shot down my arm, and then another flash of pain from my side. I don't remember much else of the fall. I just remember laying on my stomach with cold earth beneath me. For a long moment I thought I'd just stay there forever, wait until someone found me. Resolutely I shoved that thought aside. Nonsense, there was no one that could find me. I'd die down here, alone, just as Mashus had died in the gray world, and no one except me found his body. I painfully shoved myself to my feet. The darkness in front of me was absolute. I took out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The floor beneath me was packed earth, and the walls were crumbling brick. Patches of moisture darkened the surface like mold spreading through the stone. The air smelled damp and stale. I was shaking from the cold. The wall had collapsed in one corner. Beyond it lay a small tunnel, just tall enough to permit a person to walk through without stooping. A short person, my height, almost exactly. My stomach twisted with dread as I approached it. Its walls were smooth, packed earth. There was light coming from the tunnel. I switched off my flashlight so I could see it better. A faint glow, like that of a coal, like the throat of a beast. I hesitated, not yet willing to step over the crushed brick and into the tunnel. And before I could gather my resolve, I heard someone call my name. I turned. My mother and father stood behind me. In the center of the basement, my knees went weak. They were exactly as I remembered. They stood side by side, holding hands. Why should I be so surprised? The basement was underneath their grave. After all, you don't have to go any further, my father said. You've already done so much. It's not enough, though, I whispered. It'll never be enough. Kate, my mother said gently, look at what happened to everyone that tried. Look at what happened to me. Her stomach was covered in blood. I hastily averted my eyes. I didn't want to see what the little girl had done to her. It was bad enough seeing it in my dream. It's too late. The land is turning ancient. I felt guilty telling them this. Would they be disappointed in me for letting the land get to this point? We always knew this would happen someday. Do you remember me telling you that we'd have to abandon the land when that happened? My dad's voice was soothing. I stared at my feet, unwilling to meet his eyes. He had told me that someday the land would turn ancient, and we'd be unable to control it then. Our time as campground managers would be over, and we'd have to turn it over to the inhuman things, and the town would have to fend for itself at that point. As a child, I quietly accepted this, and as an adult, I thought it was a distant future, one that I wouldn't have to deal with. I wouldn't be the one making the choices. I didn't think it'd be this hard. I didn't imagine that the outcome would be so dire. Maybe I should have ceded the land to the lady with extra eyes. I clenched my hand into a fist. It was hard to breathe, hard to think straight. Kate, my dad said gently, it's okay. You did your best. You did what you thought was right, but you can walk away now. You don't have to die for this land like we did. Just leave. Let the beast claim it. You can be free. You and Tyler can move far away from here. It'll be okay. It won't be okay, I said, raising my head to look at them. They looked so serene, standing there hand in hand. The town will suffer. They will, my mother admitted. Likely it'll become a ghost town as people die or are forced to leave. These things happen. You don't have to be the one responsible for saving them. It's your choice. My dad said, we love this land, but we also love you. Come with us. I'll give you answers. My mom promised. I'll give you closure. They were offering me everything I ever wanted in my darkest moments when I doubted myself. The ability to just walk away, to leave this responsibility behind, to abandon my family's legacy. But I loved this land. Perhaps it would lead to my destruction just as it had with my parents and everyone before me. But this was a choice I'd made countless times before, and this time would be no different. Besides, I had another obligation to fulfill. I felt it like a tug in my chest, a pull drawing me towards the tunnel. I made a promise. Now go, Bo had said, and do not fail me. Just once I would do as he told me. Just once. I turned my back to them. I stepped into the tunnel. My mother called my name one last time, and I hesitated, but I did not stop. I don't know if that was really them. We've never had ghosts or spirits on this land, but maybe it's because they're all trapped within the ice, or because they're trapped here in the basement, or maybe it was just my own doubts, given form by the basement to test my resolve. I'll never know, because I turned away from them. I walked away from the answers I so desperately wanted. I am my mother's daughter, and I love this land more than anything else. The tunnel carried me down into the earth, and the air gradually grew warmer. The moisture increased as well, flowing in my throat. I swayed with every step, and I was no longer trying to put pressure on a knife wound in my side. Maybe it had stopped bleeding by now, I didn't know. The only thing that mattered was that I kept going, one foot in front of the other. That was all I could do, keep going until I saw it through to the end. The light steadily grew until the tunnel opened up into a domed chamber. The heat was oppressive now. The humidity clung to my skin and beaded on my brow. The entire room was lit with a warm glow, like that of a campfire. Every surface was covered with a thick growth like vines, but the way they rippled and the lines marking their surface reminded me of muscles. They converged in the middle as the torso and head of the beast. The sound of its breathing filled the chamber and echoed in my ears. Its throat glowed with a fire inside, visible even beneath the skin. Its eyes were stars staring down at me, and protruding from its chest was the little girl. She was no longer a girl. She'd grown. We were the same age, I thought, and it might have been blood loss, but it seemed that lights danced in my vision, wreathing her brow like a crown. Her arms were pulled back, trapped in the beast's chest, its black veins burrowing into her flesh. Her legs were similarly imprisoned, vanishing into the twisted mass of vine-like muscles from the waist down. Our eyes met. She stared at me in helpless desperation, waiting for me, for anyone. "You're the heart of this land," I whispered. "You said you had no mother because you were never born. It's because the land is not yet ancient, isn't it? You're not whole yet." I took a step towards her. The beast towered over its captive, waiting for me to walk within striking range. All around me, the room rippled, the muscles of the beast stirred. I stumbled as the ground underneath me shifted. I stood there a moment, legs spread, trying to maintain my balance. The torso of the beast was stationary, at least. I regarded it for a moment, trying to figure out my approach. I had my knife clutched in my hand. It felt like I couldn't let it go anymore, as the blood stuck my fingers together and bound the hilt to my flesh. I could come up from behind it. If it was rooted in place, then I could get behind it and climb up its back until I was close enough to sink my knife into its neck from behind. My knife could cut through anything. It was made from the rib of my great-aunt and bound with the muscles of her heart, a weapon forged from my family's defiance of death. Surely it would be enough to kill the beast. I picked my way across the uneven floor of the chamber. The beast's muscles twitched as I did, and a low growl emanated from its chest. The woman trapped there let out a single sob at the sound. I resolutely ignored her. I'd deal with her once the beast was out of the way. I'd come this far, and I had no intention of letting the beast or the little girl take this land away from me. I'd fight until my last breath, and if this was the way to ascension, to remaking myself into something else, then I'd go into that darkness, screaming my defiance to the last shot. It grew harder and harder the closer I got to the beast's back. It didn't try to turn and bite at me. Perhaps it knew it wouldn't be able to turn that far, but the muscles of its body began to feel mushy, like they were made of mud. It was difficult to pull my feet free of them, like it was trying to swallow me up like it had the little girl. I stabbed into the beast with my knife, using it to give myself purchase as I climbed up onto its back. The creature roared in pain and rage, so close it couldn't stop me. My anger was hot in my veins. This thing had killed my dad. Now it was my turn to take my revenge. I was on its back, clinging to the fibrous tendrils that ran down its spine. I held on to them for purchase as the beast shook back and forth, trying to fling me off. And then, when it twisted violently to one side, I used that motion to give momentum to the arm that held the knife. The blade bit deep into the side of its neck. I wrenched backwards, ripping through its oily flesh. Blood spilled out dark crimson and coated my arm, and there was an impact in my chest just between the collarbones. A flash of pain, blinding my body went numb with the shock. I fell backwards and landed in the coils of the beast's muscles, sprawled across the floor like so many vines. I couldn't breathe from the pain. It was like I was the one who had been stabbed. Slowly, the beast's anguished thrashing subsided. It grew still, its breathing as labored as mine. And beneath that, I heard the quiet weeping of the little girl. I picked myself up. The ground clutched at me, reluctant to let me go, and I felt like I was clawing my way out of sand. My arm ached, and I wondered if I'd landed on it badly and fractured the bone. But then I saw something out of the corner of my eye. The beast blood coating my arm like rust. It was moving. It was forming veins. And there was a flash of pain, like a pin prick. And I watched in horror as a thin bead of red blood formed where the beast's blood had pierced my skin. No. I cried. No. I clawed desperately at the black veins wrapped around my forearms. I scraped off skin, and still they remained, burrowing ever deeper into my muscles. My very bones ached with pain. I had a brief, wild thought that I could cut them out with a knife. But even I faltered at such a horrific act. I stumbled around to the front of the beast and stared up at its myriad of glittering eyes. In its chest, the woman trembled in her prison. Her head was bowed, her gaze averted, and her cheeks shone with terrors. The beast made no move. It waited. It knew it only had to wait. It would consume me. Already the vines along the ground were wrapping around my ankles, eager, anxious. What do I do? I cried in desperation. The woman stirred. Her head jerked a fraction, but she still did not look at me. You killed my mother, I sobbed. You killed my aunt. Can't you? Just this once. Save me, I was trying to help. Ascension is a death of sorts. Her words came with difficulty. She seemed confused, like a child, I thought. A child that didn't know what was expected of them yet. She'd killed people I loved in her misguided attempts to save the land. But in that regard, was I any different? I stared up at the beast. Long ago, a little girl died right as the land turned old. It was an accident, nothing more. But her family's helpless anger to senseless tragedy created a beast, and we perpetuated that across generations. All of this was part of me. All of this made me who I am, my love for the land, my heart a woman crowned with light, and my flaws, my anger a monstrous beast burning beneath my skin. I never wanted this. I whimpered. I wanted to protect myself, to be stronger than the creatures that hunted me, to be safe, to no longer feel the helpless anger of knowing there is nothing I can do. You can't, she said, and it felt like her words were echoed in the beast's ragged breathing. I run a private campground. I have a list of rules to keep everyone safe, and in them, I promise my campers that the lady with extra eyes will help them, that you can trust her. I think the first part is true. I think she will still help them. Trusting her, however, was a mistake. If you're new here, you should really start at the beginning, and if you're totally lost, this may help. I know a lot of stories. There's patterns to them, and once you know those patterns, you can sometimes better understand the behavior of these things that are not human. There is a story about a woman that is cursed into the shape of a monstrous serpent. The hero rescues her by braving the horrors of her castle, and each night he throws an article of clothing over her head until the curse is broken. Then they leave together. She earns his trust, and then she takes everything he has and flees, leaving him desolate and betrayed. Just because someone is cursed doesn't mean they were ever innocent. Just because you save someone doesn't mean they're not your enemy. I think our natures may be less malleable than I hoped. The lady with extra eyes has betrayed my family in the past, and perhaps this is just how she is. Perhaps she can no more help it than she can prevent becoming the lady in chains. And as for me, perhaps I cannot change my nature either. I do intend to kill the lady with extra eyes, even though I do not think she is the cause behind the bad year. I think she's yet another victim to it, and so she won't stop until the bad year ends, and I have no leads with which to go on. So I will fight to protect my own life, just as I was unwilling to sell my land and instead fought the man with no shadow. So I am also unwilling to simply die. Perch's warning is an impossibility. I cannot save them all. I have already failed in that. I'm going to focus on keeping myself alive and stopping the bad year, and after that, well, Christmas is still a ways off, despite what the craft stores think. Speaking of craft stores, we tried to fix the man with the skull cup that was super awkward to write. Maybe I should try out a random name every post from that list that someone has compiled until one seems to fit. This week is Ansel, or should I hold a poll? Except that's how I'd wind up with a name like Scully McSkullface. I don't know how to go about this. I'm not sure I can go about this, as he said if I knew it might not work. I think names just evolve for these creatures. Maybe I just have to live with writing awkward sentences. It's not like I don't already abuse commas and other grammatical rules. Ironic that I'm really bad at following the rules of grammar. But in my defense, English teachers aren't known to kill people. Usually, anyway, someone came out to help fix it. Actually, one of my campers that has been following these accounts had an idea and brought a friend with them that had some specialized knowledge. They mixed up some plaster with some blood in it and fit the two pieces back together. We decided to refill it using the recipe, but we didn't have any blood from what was already there. It did have blood on it, but the blood was on the sharp edges where it split, and I think that was actually the lady with extra eyes blood. From the splatter pattern, I think he took the broken half of the cup and jacked her in the face with it. It was all we had to go on, though, so we left that in there. I got blood forcibly taken by inviting my brother over for dinner, and then stabbing him. He was so pissed, and then I used my blood as willingly given. The plan was to give the man with the skull cup some of it to drink, but the cup just fell apart in my hands as I took it to him, and all that blood spilled on the ground. And now I need a new rug in my living room because I can't get the stain out of it. My guests were at a loss on what to do after that, so they bought some t-shirts and other souvenirs from the camp store and went home. I suppose I'll just have to get a replacement skull like everyone suggested in the comments. I admit I haven't made any progress towards securing it yet. I had a more pressing problem to deal with first. Remember how I said that I felt there were still spiders in my house. My house is fairly well protected from inhuman things. We build up our defenses over generations out of necessity. Even I'm not sure what all is in here. My dad replaced some trim around the front door once and found talismans nailed to the wall underneath. They're still there. We have no idea how old they are, but it seemed prudent to leave them alone. So while I thought I was seeing spiders in the house, I didn't think it was that big of a problem. Sure, there were a lot when the lady invaded the house, but she brought those with her, right? And she broke down the wall so they could get in, right? I guess the one that escaped from the Brussels sprouts a while ago has been multiplying. Some innate sense woke me in the night. There was no outward indication as to why I would wake up, so for a moment I lay there and stared at the ceiling. The little girl was crying outside my window, so nothing was unusual there. Perhaps I simply couldn't sleep, as rare as that was. Then I heard a faint clicking noise. The fridge. Perhaps I certainly had to conduct some percussive maintenance on it before to get it to shut up. I sat up and tried to swing my legs off the bed to go investigate. There was something wrapped tightly around them, binding them together. In a panic, I flipped the bedside lamp on, and watched in horror as a multitude of spiders skittered away, and over the edge of the bed, a rippling black and brown fade that quickly vanished out of sight. They left behind a shimmering white web of spider silk, entombing my ankles and shins. I admit it. I screamed. Then I grabbed the knife, that knife from the knit stand, and frantically hacked at the spider webs. They parted easily, and I jumped up onto the bed and slapped at my legs in a frenzy, almost hyperventilating until my skin stung, and even in my panic I had to admit that there weren't any spiders on me, Doc. Then my hair brushed the back of my neck, and the whole process of me slapping at myself and shrieking started all over again. Look, I know I've dealt with worse shit in the past and handled it, but that is a hell of a way to wake up. I had spider spray in the garage, quite a bit of it. Actually, I went to the hardware store and cleaned them out after I was released from the hospital. I only had to get there, and, believe me, it was hard to work up the nerve to jump off the bed. Even though the spiders had fled, I envisioned them hiding under the bed, waiting for me to jump off. My mouth was dry with fear as I worked up the nerve. I ran through my plan neatly in my head, jumped from the bed, grabbed my shoes off the floor, run for the garage. I was faster than the spiders. I could do this. I jumped, I stooped, and grabbed my shoes, trying hard not to look around. I didn't need to know if the spiders were spilling out from under my bed. I really didn't. Then I hurried for the hallway, flipping on the lights, and pulled my shoes on as I went. If I had to squish some arachnids, it wasn't going to be with my bare feet. My plan fell apart at the living room. I flipped on the lights. The split skull lay on the coffee table. The man with the skull cup lay on the sofa, his arms crossed over his chest, just as we'd left him, except he was covered with a blanket of spiders now. They'd webbed him up to his waist. I guess the lady with extra eyes wasn't keen on taking risks. She'd let her brethren immobilize us both, and then move in for the kill. The spiders rotated to face me as I stood frozen in the hallway. Then they moved as one, a rippling wave falling from the sofa and to the floor. Their legs clicked on the hardwood. Like the whisper of branches in the wind, the noise came from behind me as well. I was trapped between the two groups of spiders. I couldn't stay where I was. They'd overwhelmed me, and I remembered their bites and what it had done to me last time. So I jumped on the nearest piece of furniture, which was the love seat. The spiders swarmed around the base, while I climbed up to stand on the back, watching as the first line of their numbers began to scale the aged fabric. I'd bought myself a few minutes in which to call for help. I always grab my cell phone when I flee my bedroom for any reason. I cannot imagine how many people we've saved by their invention, my own life included. I called the old sheriff. Spiders, I said, so many spiders I needed someone to help clear them out. He said that he'd be here as fast as he could and hung up. Then I played the floor as lava around my living room, except instead of lava the floor was spiders, and I wasn't pretending. They'd swarm the coffee table and climb up after me. I'd stomp on them until their numbers threatened to overwhelm me. Then I'd jump over to the hassock and stand on that, forcing the spiders to reconvene their swarm and climb up, and I'd stomp on them for a bit and then jump to something else. There weren't enough to simultaneously cover all the furniture in the room, so this strategy held out for a while. It was exhausting, though, and I felt like my self-control was framed by the second. I kept repeating in my mind my strategy. Keep moving. Don't panic. I could not panic. I'd survive as long as I stayed calm. Keep moving. Don't panic. Keep moving. Over and over again, until I heard a vehicle pull up in my driveway and I could have wept with relief. I'd told the old sheriff over the phone that the door was locked and I wouldn't be able to come unlock it, so he'd have to make his own way in. I expected him to shoot the lock off. Instead, he kicked the door and got it slammed into the wall, the doorknob caving in the plaster and sticking, holding the door open. As my rescuer came striding through the gaping doorway, it wasn't the old sheriff. It was his wife. I've always wanted to do that, she said pleasantly, wrenching the door free of the wall as she entered. It swung limply on the broken hinges, making a pitiful attempt to latch and finally swaying to a stop when the old sheriff's wife put her heel out to stop it. The spiders froze at her entrance. I, too, stood frozen in surprise for a moment, and then tentatively put out one foot and squished the nearest spider. And over by the door, the old sheriff's wife held up two cans of spider spray and tilted her head. Her eyes glittering with malice, the spiders fled, and she grimly chased after them, brandishing cans in both hands, spraying it liberally over the corners and cracks they vanished into as they fled. She only stopped her assault when both canisters sputtered and died. Then she discarded the empty bottles by absently tossing them aside and letting them roll away across the hardwood. I was still on the coffee table, stunned by this turn of events. This wife isn't the sort of thing you just have show up like this. I was expecting your husband, I said. He was having trouble with his prosthetic, so I came instead. At this point I realized that I was still standing on the coffee table and thought to get off and offer her some tea and maybe some cookies, which she accepted. And then she went out to her car and came back with her basket of yarn and spent the rest of the night trying to teach me how to crochet. It kept the spiders from coming back. I guess, after that I decided it was time to move out for a little bit. My aunt volunteered her house. She had a guest bedroom, and we could put the man with the skull cup on the sofa. I packed up a week's worth of clothing and moved myself in. Then I went back for the man with the skull cup. I figured I'd need an extra hand to move him, but it turns out that he's surprisingly light. Unnaturally so, I can actually lift him by myself. Of course, he's a bit taller than me, so doing so is extremely unwieldy, and I kind of just have to drag him around instead. No, I did not drag him by his ankles all the way over to my aunt's house. I considered it, but I got the wheelbarrow out instead. Living with my aunt worked for a couple days. I replaced the front door to my house, but otherwise stayed out of it. The guest bed was softer than I was used to, and it was hard to sleep at first, in part because I'm used to listening to the little girl crying outside my window all my life. I had a similar experience when I went away to college, but at least there was noise on campus of some kind. Out here on the campground, the night is quiet, and the girl's absence was unnerving. Then, just when I thought I was used to falling asleep without her crying at my window, she found me. I think I woke not because she was here, making noise outside the guest bedroom, but because it was different from what I was used to. For a brief moment, I wondered if my aunt had left the TV on, and I placed the noise as coming from the window instead of down the hallway. I sat up in bed and listened. She wasn't crying. She was whispering. I slipped out of bed and crept carefully to the window. I crouched close to the wall, hidden beneath the base of the frame, just as I had when I was a child, and the little girl would still speak to me. I listened until the words resolved themselves, an endless litany muttered over and over, a frantic refrain touched with fear and anger. You left, she whispered. You left, you left, you left. I slowly stood. Everything in me screamed that I shouldn't, but I needed to know. I had to see what she was doing outside the window. On old land, staying alive means confronting the things you would rather not face. I drew back the curtains. The little girl stood there with her forehead pressed against the glass, her fingers clutching the edges of the window frame. Her eyes were wide and bloodshot, her pupils dilated, and her round face was framed by her straw-colored hair. The glass was fogged from the breath of her mouth and nose. She flexed her fingers. The nails pricked the edges of the glass. cracks appeared, thin lines that crackled as they spread, I turned and ran. I grabbed that damn knife on my way out the bedroom, out down the hallway to my aunt's room. I flipped on the light as I stuck my head in. "Auntie," I cried, "we've got a problem. I will say this about my family. We react pretty well to being woken abruptly in the night. My aunt was out of bed before she was even fully awake, I think, and grabbed the shotgun she kept near her bed. Yeah, my family all likes shotguns. It's a thing. It's the little girl," I said. "Guns haven't worked in the past." She grunted, but didn't put the gun aside. Hopeful thinking, I guess. She asked about the knife, and I told her that so far it had been effective against unnatural things, but we didn't know what the little girl was capable of. I'm the only one that survived letting her inside the house, and I hadn't seen how she killed my cousin. The man with no shadow had pulled me away as quickly as he could. "She wants me to return to the house," I said breathlessly. I could go out through the garage and make a run for it. My aunt was skeptical that would work. The little girl wasn't following the rules we were familiar with anymore. She was trying to get in. What's to say she'd leave me alone once I was outside? From the bedroom came another loud crack as the glass continued to fracture. "We'd barricade the living room," my aunt suggested. She wasn't making quick progress on breaking her way in, so perhaps she could be slowed long enough for Dawn and the beast to arrive. We'd leave an exit open to the garage so I could try making a run for it if this failed. I agreed, and we went to shove the bookcase over to the doorway. Another loud crack from the bedroom, like fists being slammed onto glass. I heard small shards hitting the floor. She'd broken through. I acted on instinct. I sprinted down the hallway and slammed the door to the bedroom shut, just in time to see the little girl putting a leg over the edge of the window frame to climb inside. Then I held onto the doorknob, desperately bracing myself to hold the door shut, while yelling at my aunt to get the bookcase ready to block the hallway. The door shook in its frame. She slammed her fists on it again, and it creaked at the impact. She wasn't trying to open it. She was trying to break it down. Tentatively, I let go of the doorknob and backed away, barely watching as she pounded at it. One fist after the other, a steady tempest of blows. The wood groaned under the assault. My house is infested with spiders that are out to kill me. I screamed at her. Maybe you could do something about that. I returned to the living room to help my aunt with the bookcase. Perhaps this plan could work. I said I didn't say what I was thinking, that the little girl was growing steadily more violent by the minute, that her attack was growing stronger, and that the noise we heard echoing underneath her concussive beating on the door was that of wood splintering. We almost had the bookshelf in place. We just needed to tip it over. My aunt stepped back, and I thought it was to get a better grip, so I stayed where I was, bracing myself to push. With one final blow, the door shattered. That's when my aunt hit me in the back of the head with the stock of her shotgun. I don't think I was unconscious for long, but it only takes seconds to make a decision, and perhaps a handful more to act on it. Dying takes a little longer, but it can still only be a matter of minutes, especially when your internal organs have been scooped out and scattered across the floor, much like a child will throw sand into the air just to see how it lands. And that was enough to satisfy the little girl. For when I woke, she was gone, and I was the only human left alive in the house. Everything after that is a blur. I called my brother at some point, and he called the rest of the family. The police arrived, and they promised to take care of securing a death certificate that had an innocuous reason, natural causes. That little falsehood doesn't matter. My family will remember how she died the same way as my mother. A couple members of my staff volunteered to clean up the mess with the offer of a hefty bonus. I thought about raising the house, but that's not how we do things. I'm sure we'll need it for someone, as the campground calls my bloodline home in one way or another. I returned to my house sometime in the afternoon. I had no choice. I hadn't even begun to formulate a strategy for how I would survive the night, with the little girl forcing me to remain here and with the spiders waiting for me. My entire body felt numb, and part of me thought that maybe it didn't matter anymore. Maybe I should just give up and give the lady with extra as what she wanted. Sooner or later this land would claim my life, after all. Would it really be so bad if it were the former? The smell of peppermint struck me as I walked in through the front door. It hung thick in the air, but not unpleasantly so. I drew in a sharp breath, and it filled my lungs, and it felt good, like cold water on a summer day. Leaves peeked out of the cracks between the wall, and the trim, the serrated tips, vivid green against the plaster. I ventured further into my house. It grew through the edges of the window frames, between the gaps in the aged hardwood floors. It sprouted in every crevice and cranny, cloying the air with its scent. I didn't find a single spider as I inspected the house, nor did they appear that evening when I sat in my living room with all the lights on, waiting for them to attack. I couldn't bring myself to speak to the little girl at first, not after what she did, but the strangeness of the peppermint, which continues to live just as I found it, neither growing further nor dying from lack of light and water, finally forced me to act. I came and sat by the window, leaning against the wall, and I listened to her weeping for a while. Finally I spoke. "Did you do this?" I asked softly. "Did you cause the peppermint to grow?" "You came home," she whispered, and then she sniffed. Her voice cracked, and she began to cry once more. "I'm a campground manager. I'm a little more than that, however. I am the owner of all land, and my family is bound to it and cursed by it. We are doomed to die here. For most of us, that time comes far too soon for our liking, and we die fighting for every second, screaming our rage over the unfairness of our end to an indifferent world. But very rarely we choose the way in which we will die. I do not think my aunt anticipated this end, but she chose it. Her life to save mine. Her funeral is tomorrow. We'll bury her in the family graveyard, next to my uncle."